So this is a tutorial on adding handles to the Emmaline retreat bag. Now the difference between this and the original pattern is that obviously I've added handles, but it also has a contrast bottom. Now the first thing I'm going to show you is how I cut the handles and the bottom and also the two interior pockets out of a fat quarter. So the first thing I do is take my fat quarter and square it up on my mat. So I've done that on 3 sides, the bottom, one side and the top. Then the first cut I make are the 2 handles. So they're 2 1/4 inches wide. So I cut one and then the second one, and they're the full length of the fat quarter. They'll be cut down after they're sewn to 16 inches, but for now we'll cut them 18 inches. The next cut we're going to make is from the bottom up to this line here, which is 8.5 inches in, which is this line along here. So we make a cut across there and then cut that in half. So you've got 4 1/4 and 4 1/4. So that's another cut along there. Then we cut the width. These 2 pieces here are the contrast bottom. So they're 13.5 inches wide. So cut 2 of those. And then we cut the pockets, which are 8 inches square. So from here up we measure 8 inches and make a cut, and then we measure across from here to here, which is 8 inches, and then from here to here is another 8 inches. So there you can see we've got the 2 handles, the contrast bottom, which is the 2 pieces there, and the 2 pocket pieces. And these 2 pieces here left over, you can use those as your zipper end covers if you would like to. Now we're going to sew the handles. So the first thing you do is take the handle and fold it in half lengthwise, right sides together. Now instead of using the usual 1/4 inch seam allowance, this time we'll use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now the reason is because when you make the tube, I've sewn this one here, you press it down and press the seam allowance outwards. That's the back of the tube there, and that's the front. And as you can see, that extra seam allowance forms another inner lining in the strap. It gives it a little bit extra body. And that's the reason I used the 3/8 inch seam allowance. So to get started, that's how it looks like when it comes out of the sewing machine. And so you start by pressing the seam allowances open as well as pressing the tube flat. So I've started on this one and I'll keep going. So you press the seam flat, at the same time you're pressing the tube flat. Give it a bit of steam. And so now you've got an inside out tube. Like that. So now we're going to turn this tube right side out. We're going to use the safety pin method. So we place the safety pin inside the tube and then at least 1/4 of an inch down. If you do less than 1/4 of an inch down from the end, the threads may come out and you'll lose your safety pin halfway down. So insert that like that and then start feeding the safety pin down into the tube. Tuck those little ends in to get it started. It's a little bit fiddly at first, but once you get going it's easier. There we go. Started now. Now instead of bunching it up like that, as I go, I like to keep the tube flat as it goes, like that, just so the seam allowance can form another lining inside that tube and that stays nice and flat. So just do a little bit at a time and gradually inch your way down. If you do a lot at a time, that's when it all bunches up and it makes it hard to turn inside out, or right side out, I should say. So just do a little bit at a time and you'll eventually get it the right way round. As you can see, I'm keeping it flat as I'm going. So I do that using my thumb and finger, pushing a little bit down here and then pulling it up there. Now we're going to make the straps before we sew them onto the bag. So I've trimmed this strap down to 16 inches. So that strap is now 16 inches long. Now what you do is you find the center lengthwise of the strap and make a mark in the center, which I've already done that. Then what I do, you can either measure out from here or I make a template. I find a template's quicker and easier, especially if you're doing a lot of these. I got an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I measured 3.5 inches across. It's critical, and I'll show you why later. So put the excess aside for now, but this is 3.5 inches wide by 11 inches long. Turn it 90 degrees and find the center of that sheet of paper and make a vertical mark down there. Then measure out 4.5 inches either side of that center point to give you a total from here to here of 9 inches. And how you use this template, you place the center on the center there and make a mark where that vertical line is, and same on the opposite side. Then you place the seam side up and fold in half lengthwise, and you would top stitch from that first mark through the center, keep going all the way to the second, or that, well, I guess it's the third mark that you've made. So you're sewing a total of 9 inches along that strap, and you repeat that with the second strap. Now we're going to attach the handle to the upper section of the outside of the bag. So this upper section that I've cut here of this fabric is 5.25 inches long by 13.5 inches wide. So again, that's 5.25 inches long and 13.5 inches wide. Now I've fused this down to the batting. I use the Pellon, the iron-on Pellon. So that's a full 9 inches. This Pellon is 9 inches long by 13.5 inches wide, and I've fused this fabric down. Then we take the template that we made earlier. If I flip it over and turn it 90 degrees, you'll see this is 3.5 inches wide, and I found the center point at the bottom. Then from there up, I've measured 2 3/4 inches and drawn a horizontal line. You can of course measure this as you're going, but if you're making lots of them, a template's quite helpful. So now I've also found the center point of this raw edge here. So that's the center point of the upper part of the fabric. So I'll line up that center point there with the center point of the template. Now the width of this, which is 3.5, is the width between the ends of the handle. So I just line up the raw edge of the handle with the template, because it gives you a 90-degree edge which again, that's why a template's useful. Otherwise you need to measure this each time. And then you pin that down. And then making sure there's no kinks in the handle or twists, you bring that around to the other side like that, lining up that folded edge with the edge of the template, and just pin that down. Then this mark here is to mark where you would turn your stitching. As you stitch up here, this mark is to indicate where to turn and go back down. So just make a mark on your strap. You can of course measure this, just making sure everything's lined up, and make a mark on your handle, and then on the other side do the same thing, like that. So you've got a mark here and a mark here, and that should be your handle. So you'll sew top stitch up here, across, and then back down about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and repeat on the other side. About 1/8 of an inch in, you go up, across, and then back down. So the last part in this tutorial is to sew the bottom section to this top section. So we take our piece, which is 4 1/4 inches long by 13.5 inches wide. Again, that's 4 1/4, which we cut from that fat quarter, by 13.5 inches long. Then we place that right sides together against that top section there, lining up the edges, and then we use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew a seam along there. Then once you've sewn that seam, fold that back over, press it down, and top stitch along that section. So this is the side section completed, and I've folded over that bottom section and pressed it to the pellon underneath, and then top stitched along that bottom section there. The only thing I would suggest is to pin the handle out the way, particularly when you're sewing the zipper, so the handle doesn't get caught in any of the seams. Then you repeat the same process to make another one for the other side, and then just continue on with the pattern as it's written.